If several students are calling out at once, we normally just describe what's happening. A number of you are still calling out. Remember our class agreement for asking questions. So that cues to the agreement, or maybe a simple reminder, hands up, thanks, without calling out. So we try to focus on the expected behaviour. If a student persists, we need to name that student. For example, in this example here, Ehud repeatedly called out and he was clicking his fingers. And because I was initially ignoring him, other students by this time had their hands up and were waiting. I said, Ehud, 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 and eventually he looked at me. I said, you're calling out across the classroom. And before I could finish, he said, I know. He knew what he wanted to talk about. I said, I'm sure you do know. A bit of brief partial agreement goes a long way, brief partial agreement. I said, in our class though, Ehud, it's hands up without calling out. As I took my eyes off him to convey that that brief behaviour cue was finished, and I was now going to refocus on the students who did have their hands up, he very sulkily said, I was only asking a question. That part of the behaviour is what we tactically ignore. We don't ignore the repeated calling out. Now, because I'd had to remind him several times during the lesson about hands up without calling out or talking over others, just before the bell went and I dismissed the class, I said, Ehud, I want to see you briefly after class. He started to argue with me. What do I have to stay back for? I said, I won't keep you long. I just need to have a brief chat with you. As the students left, I kept the door open and he stood by the door and I said, Ehud, I know you want to be outside with your friends. I understand that. So we briefly tuned into how he's feeling. And I know I'm not your regular teacher. However, I'm really concerned about the way you were calling out in class. And to help him to understand that, I briefly said, do you mind if I show you what I mean? Because he said, what do you mean calling out? And we call this behaviour mirroring. We always ask students permission though first. Do you mind if I show you what it looked like or sounded like when you did whatever it is we're referring to? And he said, I don't care, because all he wanted to do was get to playtime. And I just modelled to him briefly, less than 10 seconds, about the repeated calling out. Because at one point in the lesson, he said, I'm talking to you. And I modelled that to him. And when I'd modelled it to him or mirrored it back, he said, I don't do that all the time. I said, I don't know what you do all the time, Ehud, but that's what you did this morning. And he said, I wasn't the only one calling out. I said, that's true. However, when I reminded the other students, they put their hands up and waited. You just kept going for it, which is why I wanted to talk to you now. And he sighed and he said, can I go now? I said, just before you go, I just want to remind you of our classroom agreement. And I referred him back to that poster I showed you before about how we learn, the rights and responsibilities of learning. So even that brief follow-up for, I would say, probably 5 minutes was a way of saying I care enough about this, Ehud, to talk about this away from the attention of your mates. So with repeated behaviour like that, that follow-up is important. And sometimes we might need to do that a few times. If it's particularly persistent, we need to ask a senior teacher to sit on those behaviour conversations as well.